So tonight I'm going to try and defend the indefensible. I'm going to argue that catastrophizing, which is a sort of deliberate exaggeration of the problems we face, has actually been absolutely fundamental in the development and the smooth functioning of complex societies. I'm sure you will have noticed that it feels like we're living in an age of crisis. If you look at the media, we're sort of bombarded with a deluge of sort of constant doom-mongering, that we're sort of on the abyss of some sort of disaster, environmental disaster, economic disasters, political disasters, you name it. And it's that sort of sense that we're sort of living at a time almost of the end of the world. Now, recently, actually, the sort of focus has sort of turned on the peddlers of that sort of naysaying and sort of doomsday argument. And actually, people have started to look and accuse people of catastrophizing, the deliberate exaggeration and distortion of the problems and crises that we face. And what they argue is that, for a start, actually what it does is it undermines the fabric of society. It creates division. And also it creates apathy, where everything just seems too much, as if we can't solve our own problems. Now, there's undoubted truth in that. I mean, if you think about the peddling of sort of populist conspiracy theories that we find everywhere, there's undoubtedly some truth to that. But, we can also say that if we look at crises, that actually, they are, if we look at the sort of impact of them, the power of them, the destructive power of them, they can spread like a contagion. But there's something interesting about that. I mean, if you think about the Wall Street crash of '29, which sort of created total devastation across America for decades afterwards. Of course it was built on the sort of fundamental weaknesses of the American economy, rampant speculation with borrowed money. But that was just the start. What really fueled it was basically blind panic. Like most stock market crashes, they have nothing to do with objective thought or analysis, they're to do with what we feel. So, in some respects, that's one side of the argument, but actually that also sort of highlights the huge psychological importance and also the power of catastrophizing. And what I want to argue tonight is this, is that actually we've been using, or our leaders have been using catastrophizing not only to divide us, but also to unite us since the dawn of the first cities. In 6000 BC, in ancient Iraq, a huge or very important sort of human experiment, probably the bravest experiment we've ever done, took place. And that was the building of the first cities. You might think, for us, these days, it's kind of, it doesn't seem like anything. But that was a huge deal. The idea of living and working and collaborating with people who were not from your own bloodline or from your own families was a huge kind of development. And it wasn't something, and it's something which, why did they do it? Why did they come together? Because in the end, it was for sort of to make their lives better. Basically, the idea of working together made us better. And here, for a very pragmatic reason, I don't know how many of you have been to Iraq. It's arid plains with these big 2 rivers running through it. And actually, what the people there decided to do is to create a sort of fertile agricultural land, is they decided to manage the rivers with a series of canals and locks and irrigation to basically create fertile land. Now, you can't do that in a small group. You have to be organized, and you have to basically work together. And this is the main reason why these cities were developed. And this is what happened. Turn the desert, here are the locks, turn the desert into fertile agricultural land. Complex societies are difficult things. They are fragile. They are riven, and they're always in danger of internal divisions and external threats. They're not easy, and actually, we have to be reminded sometimes of what we've given up to be part of them. individual sovereignty. We've also, in terms of putting our resources in too. And the leaders of these Mesopotamian cities, right from the very first writing that we have 6,000 years ago, when you read their writing, it is basically often not only reminding those people of the benefits of sticking together, which is food, security, infrastructure, etc., but also the dire consequences of actually not working together. War, slavery, death, and all sorts of other horrible things. And so sometimes when you look at these texts and the texts that I look at, it can seem like the history of the ancient world is just one long disaster. One sort of, just made up completely of threats. But in some respects, what we're reading there is actually the leaders catastrophizing situations so that they could actually galvanize and bring people together collectively and to create coherence within society. Now, you probably all know the political adage about the boiling frog. That's why I had a frog at the beginning. Well, the frog is scientific bunk, but basically it's still a good story. You put a frog in boiling water, it immediately jumps out. Now, if you put it into tepid water and then slowly boil it up, it sits there and boils to death. Okay. Now, that's a very dramatic story, but in the end, this is what in the ancient world they were doing. They were basically, in many respects, creating an early warning system, but were reminding people of the benefits of this very fragile ecosystem of what we call society. And if you think about some of the great powers of history, I wrote Edward Gibbon, great historian who wrote The Decline and Fall of Rome, is 10 volumes long. And that's because the Roman leaders were always saying and warning people that they were in decline and disaster. And you think about America. The founding fathers were imagining and warning about the decline and fall of America almost from the moment of independence. Now, you can also say leaders, political manipulation. Leaders want to present themselves as savior figures. They want to do things down to say they can raise you up. But the wise leader always balances out the collective interest with their individual ambition. So why do we need catastrophizing more than ever? It's partly to do with the technological revolution that we live in now, which basically was meant to, in many respects, to solve all of our problems, but actually it's created a whole load of new ones. And most of them are about us. Because basically what it's done is it's allowed us to see ourselves as individuals, okay? Sovereign individuals in our own little atomized cyberspace worlds. A world in which we can self-curate, edit ourselves, and actually sort of strive for perfection. But actually, our problems are messy. They're not individual. Crises are basically far more than that. They are actually the collective. They are us, not the one person. And so for us, we need our politicians and we need our leaders to constantly remind us of that. And in the end, it's about, you think about the myth of Sisyphus, okay, you probably know it. He annoyed the gods, the Greek myth, and so therefore he had to spend the whole of his life, or the whole of eternity, not his life, pushing a large boulder up a hill, and it kept on falling down when he got to the top. They had to start again. And actually, the myth of Sisyphus is quite apt for this, because firstly, it shows you we can't push this boulder up the hill on our own. But secondly, it also tells us something about us, okay? And it tells us that in the end, it gives us an idea of basically what we're here for, and that is to strive. And also, the sort of big qualities that, the key qualities that I see of humanity. One of them is hope, and the other one is resilience, that we just keep going and we work together. And I can't think of a better example of that. You think about the Good Friday Agreement. I haven't been here very long, but that really strikes me as something, basically, again, resilience, hope, the collective, moving things forward. It's always messy, and often, actually, the job isn't done. But actually, this is what we are here for. So in the end, crises and catastrophizing play a key role in all societies. They bring us together. And actually, here's Milton Friedman, the American economist. Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. I think what's important here is that our crises can either make us or break us. And we need our leaders to remind us and to remind ourselves of that. Thank you.